Afternoon, everybody. For those who I've not yet met, my name is Patty Mulvihill. I'm the Executive Director for the League of Oregon Cities, and I'm excited to welcome you all to this week's legislative webinar. We've had almost one full week of the legislative session for 2024, and our lobbyists are here today to give you some updates on some key bills. A quick housekeeping matter, if you've not already done so, please make sure that your microphone is muted and that it remains muted throughout today's webinar. Second, in recognition of how valuable each of your time is, we're going to stop today's webinar promptly at 1 p.m. We've got a lot of information to provide you today. We'll try our best to move through it quickly, and we will do so by taking all questions at the end of the presentations from the LOC lobbyist. That doesn't mean you have to remember your question throughout the whole day. You can place it in the chat at any time. Staff will be monitoring it, making sure that we call on those who've asked questions in the order in which they've been received. Do please note that we do prioritize LOC members over members of the general public when it comes to asking questions. So for today's legislative webinar, here's what we're going to cover today. We're going to start by talking about the governor's housing package. For those who track bills, that's Senate Bill number 1537. We're going to finish off with three bills. One deals with police dispatch supervisors and labor law. That's House Bill 4115. We'll talk about Measure 110 reforms. That's House Bill 4002. And we'll finish up with a bill that impacts prescription drug costs. That's House Bill 4149. So again, because of the information we have to convey, we're going to hold questions till the end, and I'll make it very clear when we're ready for question and answers. So we're going to start today, like I noted, with Governor's housing bill. Ariel Nelson is the LOC lobbyist who handles housing, homelessness, and land use issues. During last week's webinar, she gave you a preview of what was happening with Senate Bill 1537. Again, that's the governor's housing bill. Ariel, we are 1 week into session, perhaps not even a full week yet. What can you tell us about the bill and where things stand now?
Hi, everyone. Happy Friday. Happy to give an update on the governor's housing bill, Senate 1537. It's been a week in regular time and session time. It feels like maybe a month. Things are moving very, very quickly. On Senate Bill 1537, it had its first public hearing yesterday morning in the Senate Housing and Development Committee. This was a very, I will say, carefully orchestrated hearing. It was packed committee room with overflow. The governor presented and her staff presented on the bill for probably the first half hour of a 90-minute meeting. And then from their testimony was strictly limited to 2 minutes. So the LOC testified, we had a couple cities testify, but I think one of the reasons city presence was limited was because the -4 amendment, which was the latest update to the bill, was only posted late in the afternoon the day before. So most cities had not had a chance, and we hadn't fully reviewed the bill, which is 70 pages, and there's a considerable amount in there. The record to submit written testimony is open until 8 a.m. tomorrow. So we do have a number of cities that have submitted letters on the record, and we encourage you to do so. The League is currently neutral on the bill. This is because two of the sections we are still opposed to in the bill, were introduced last session in the governor's bill, HB 3414. And we, thanks to the support of legislators with previous local government experience, were able to get some amendments that significantly restructured one of the sections that we opposed the strongest. That brought us to neutral last session. And because the bill did not get worse, that was our starting point for this session when discussions picked back up this fall. Again, we're neutral. There are parts of the bill that we very much support, namely the significant proposed investments for infrastructure, site-specific infrastructure for water, sewer, stormwater, and transportation. And then a notable improvement in the -4 amendments is expanding that to larger scale water infrastructure projects. The example being used is a pump station or a trunk line. So those are really important for your communities, as I know you know. Just want to encourage you to submit a letter on the record. There's some really good examples on there of kind of what cities have done already. There's more than one, but the city of Albany was great, just talking about which sections of the bill you like, recognizing and thanking the governor for those sections, like the infrastructure funding, And then explaining, the impact of the sections we don't like, and what that means on the ground for your city. I think the most valuable, impactful things that cities are doing right now is explaining to your legislators how these bills will impact you, giving real life examples. Like this development that we supported that brought this much housing would not be possible under this bill, or this will take away a tool for us to be able to do X. So that's really helpful. And again, there are examples on their record for that. I'll talk a little bit about the content. I don't have time to cover the whole bill, but I am available for questions at the end if we have time, or happy to follow up with anyone offline. So I mentioned there's two sections that we're particularly still opposed to. The first one is the mandatory adjustment section. This is a requirement that cities approve up to 10 variances or administrative adjustments from their local siding and design standards. So that's anything from setbacks to height bonuses, to materials, window coverage, orientation of a building, a number of things, parking. So cities would have to approve up to 10 for any development. And our concerns with this is that while, yes, there are siding and design standards that can be purely aesthetic or less critical when we're talking about a housing crisis and a housing emergency, the complaint is that these cause extra cost or delay or make projects not possible when you're thinking about kind of complicated infill lots potentially. Nothing in this bill would actually guarantee that providing these adjustments would either make the housing more affordable or provide more units than otherwise. There was a requirement that the developers state that it does, but no ability for a city to push back and say, look, this actually doesn't further our housing goals. So examples of how, those tools that are being limited through that adjustment requirement are really helpful. The second section we have concerns on is the sections that stand up a new housing accountability and production office. It's called the HAPO, the acronym. It is a lot more enforcement authority at DLCD. They would take in complaints of alleged housing violations at the local level and then follow up. Their intent is to lead with technical assistance and help with code updates for cities who may not be up to date with the latest housing requirements. But they also have quite a bit of enforcement authority at the back end of that. Our major challenge at this point is that there's no transparency built into the bill. There's really no context of how they expect this bill to work. And so we've been asking for a letter, a memo, an overview that can accompany the language that's in the bill. Because if you just read the bill, it's really not clear what the intention is here. That is supposedly in the works. We've also asked for a commitment to a partnership and a process that they consult with both cities and developers before they stand up this program, this office, and that we have the opportunity to do regular check-ins, at least in the first year, to review and discuss what kind of complaints they're taking in, how they're being resolved, what's going on, and the ability to kind of discuss potential changes that need to be made if things are not going as intended. So those are the two pieces we're continuing to push on. Again, encourage you to get stuff on the record. It does close tomorrow morning, so I know that's not a lot of time. But we will have additional conversations, and it always your conversations with your local legislators are the most valuable, having them understand what this bill means for their district and their communities.
Thanks. Ariel, quick question, just because there could be people who haven't followed the legislative process before or are newly elected. Can you explain when you say a -4 amendment, what does that mean for people who may not be as savvy as you are with the process?
Absolutely. So anytime what the bill is introduced as the introduced bill. So Senate Bill 1537, if you go to OLS, you can click on the bill, you can view the text. And then through the legislative process, there's the opportunity to amend any bill. And the amendments, there can be multiple amendments that the legislature considers, and they vote on whether to adopt those amendments. They're numbered. There currently are no other amendments posted. So the fact that it's named a -4 just means that there were potentially another legislator has requested amendments to the bill that just haven't been published or shared, or sometimes the drafter, a bill gets through editing and finalized and the requester says, wait, you got this wrong, go back and get us another one. So I don't think that means we're going to see a -2 or -3. I think they would have been potentially introduced, or we may see it at the next procedural step, which is called a work session. In order for the bill to move out of this committee, it has to get a vote. So it has to be scheduled for a work session. And at a work session, they can either vote to move the bill forward, or they can vote on any potential amendment. And like I said, as far as I know, the -4 is the only one posted. We may see some surprise amendments posted the same day. It's rare for a bill to move forward with an amendment that hasn't been discussed in a previous hearing, but it can happen. We also are still pushing for additional technical amendments on this bill. The -4 didn't quite get us there in terms of just making sure it's drafted clearly so that cities have a chance at implementing this, regardless of if we agree with the policy intent. So there will be another amendment. I forgot to mention that, just to clarify, just more clearly draft some things. So we are working on that. So you will see potentially a -5 or a -6 that gets posted for a work session. And it will have to get posted in the next week, or it has to get, I think they've already posted the bill for work session, but it'll have to come out. The next major deadline in the legislature for all bills is bills have to move out of their first committee by Monday. So so I think next Monday. Sorry, I'm getting up on my days. I'll post it in the chat. I don't remember what day it is, to be honest. And I see a question, public comment is not taken at a work session. It's the chair can, I think they'd have to post it for a public hearing in order to take public comment. So great question. Yeah, it's just a work session. And like I said, the record closes for public testimony, the written testimony tomorrow morning. So that doesn't mean you can't keep talking to your legislator. And particularly if you have a legislator on the Senate Housing and Development Committee, I'll post the link to that committee in the chat. But also, this is a bill that's being discussed in the caucuses on both sides. So, regardless of if your legislator is on the committee, they still have a voice in their party's discussion around the bill.
Thanks, Ariel. And Ariel, is it possible to put a link in the chat where how they can file their written comments by tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. If you could do that as well, that'd be great.
Absolutely. I'll get all that information in there.
Thank you, Ariel. Okay, we're going to pivot a little bit. As I mentioned, we've got 3 other things that we want to talk about. They're separate bills. The Police Dispatch Supervisor Bill, which is House Bill 4115. Measure 110, which is Measure 110 Reform, I apologize, House Bill 4002, and a bill that impacts prescription drug costs, which is House Bill 4149. All 3 of those bills are being monitored, lobbied, and managed by LOC's general government lobbyist, Scott Winkles. So Scott, I'm going to let you take these bills in the order that works best for you. So that way I don't have to keep interrupting you. But if you could just give us a presentation and let the members know what they need to know about these 3 bills, I'd appreciate it.
Happy to do that. Thank you very much, Patty. I'm going to start in the order that Patty gave you. So the Senate bill or House Bill 4115, this actually puts we think this puts a period on the end of a long running conversation conflict that police management and the police unions have had. It's extended for my entire time at the league, which is approaching 18 years now. What the bill would have done as introduced would have allowed police supervisors who don't have economic discipline authority to join a bargaining unit with the same officers they supervise. This introduced, it was very similar to what the fire service got in 2013, and we saw battalion chiefs, deputy chiefs being lumped into the one bargaining unit. There was a lot of political energy around this bill this session. We had bipartisan supporters of the bill as introduced. The Republican House leader is a retired Portland police sergeant and union official as well. So we were in a position where we did have to negotiate. And so the agreed on settlement would be that it's capped at a sergeant level, a frontline supervisor level. So it wouldn't involve your lieutenants, captains, deputy chiefs. And those sergeants could form their own bargaining unit as opposed to be in the same unit as the officers they supervise. We're very cognizant in this negotiation that about 60 of Oregon's police departments have 10 or fewer sworn officers, including their chief. And so we didn't want to disrupt the management teams in those small agencies. The bill doesn't change any of the other labor classifications. So say if you have a chief and 2 sergeants, the employer still has the ability to designate one of those as what we call a confidential employee, and that is an employee who is involved in collective bargaining negotiations or would be involved in, say, internal affairs issues, it's generally considered a best practice that the chief of the agency not be the primary investigator on on that sort of complaint. And so we were able to preserve that best practice. And so this is an issue where everybody left the table not feeling like they probably could have had more, but in a situation that is, I think, realistically the best we were going to get out of this arrangement. So it's, as I say, it's been at least 18 years that this has been in front of the legislature. And so hopefully we will not be discussing this matter ever again, or at least the next 13 years before I retire. Sorry. The next bill I'll talk about, 4002. This is the 110 bill. Big hearings this week. If you saw those, we had, I believe, Bend and Mayor Johnson from Albany testified in front of the committee on the bills, on the -1 amendment to House Bill 4002. In the bulletin this week, when you check, you'll see the testimony that the League and our public safety partners submitted. There are parts of the amendment that we support. There are parts of this that I believe needs work. My understanding is the amendments are not ready. We had gotten a notice this weekend just to be available over the weekend to work on the fiscal impact statement for this amendment, but that's been rescinded. So I guess I get to have a Saturday. So that's where we are. You know, I think I know there's a lot of tension in the membership on this issue. There are reasons we haven't sent out mass alerts and those sorts of things. If you watch the public discussion on this bill, and you can see some of the other interests on this bill who are opposed to what the League is asking for, you know, they're being fairly aggressive in their comments, and we're gonna behave in a way that keeps us at the table, because this is a bill with a lot of moving parts, and even if we don't get to a support position, we have to make sure those parts work. So I think there's a likelihood we do get to a point where we send out the mass alert. They're not there yet. I understand the frustration in the membership. I do ask that you allow us to work inside the building and stay at the table and have these conversations. I see a hand up. Patty, do you want me to take that now, or would you like? Okay.
Let's wait to the end. I see your hand. Let's wait.
And then the last bill, good news, House Bill 4149. This deals with pharmacy benefits managers. If you remember from last session, this was a massive effort on the grassroots efforts of the leagues to defeat this bill. I want to give a tremendous amount of credit to Representative Nancy Nathanson. She called us into her office and in a very polite way and being very gracious. She told us she was pulling out the parts of the bill that were of a concern to us. So what the bill would have done is increase the per prescription cost for all prescriptions issued. Very expensive for the CIS plans, also for our self-insured employers and those of you who are getting your health insurance on the market. We will be having a workup. This isn't the issue isn't put to bed, but we're okay for now in this session. So what the bill will do is simply license our pharmacy benefit managers and some other regulatory requirements. And it is not in the interest of the League of Oregon Cities to further engage on this topic. So I was really great when, and I know, Patty, you didn't put the bill on the list, but I am just going to give a little, I think it's called a teaser for next week's call. 1576 is the vehicle for rec immunity. It's still in placeholder format. The amendment hasn't been published, but we're going to have a whole bunch of things to say about that Friday, I think, and I'm hoping it's good news. I will just warn everybody, as Ariel alluded, things move very quickly in session, and everything's compressed. So sometimes we end up making our best guess on what's going to happen to stay when we report out. It was where we might be a little more patient in the long session, but I think we're going to have a pretty good conversation on next Friday.
Thanks, Scott. Before we get to the questions, and I've got two people already in line for that, for Scott. Real quick, Scott, you mentioned, they kind of told you may not have to work this weekend. I think you may have just, I think you should knock on wood, by the way, since you actually said that out loud. But what does that mean anything? The fact that you don't have the amendment language yet, does that tell you anything at all? Or is it just the nature of the short session and how quickly things are moving?
I think it can mean a number of things. It could be that conversations are ongoing. It could be what we call a constitutional issue, meaning it's that part of the Constitution where things have to have enough votes to pass. So it could be a fiscal issue. There's a lot going on, but I think from what I'm understanding, it's the conversations are ongoing.
Okay, great. And
which is
so
good for us.
Good. So we are going to get to Q&A, but in the world of short session, I did have one of our other lobbyists who we hadn't planned to speak today, Nolan Plesha. Nolan's on. Nolan wants to give a brief update about some National League of Cities requests for some assistance that may be helpful for those on the call. So I'm going to let Nolan tell you about that, and then we'll jump immediately to questions and answers. And I've got Mayor Keebler up first, followed by a question from Carol Samuels. So Nolan, what do you need to tell us?
Thank you, Patty. And as she mentioned, this is regarding the NLC, so it's not directly tied to the legislative session, but something I really wanted to flag for our members and encourage your support for. The NLC has a letter to encourage Congress to fully fund the Affordable Connectivity Program, otherwise known as the ACP. This was a program that was created under the IIJA, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, to help support affordability for internet service for low-income households. It provides a $30 subsidy towards internet service, and over 22 million people across the country in pretty much every city and congressional district have households that have signed up for this program. Unfortunately, funding is set to expire by April, and as of yesterday, the FCC has officially placed a freeze on new enrollments to this program in anticipation of the program running out of funding. It's been a major barrier for folks considering signing up for this program, recognizing that they might sign up for a 2-year plan with an internet service provider under the auspice of getting the subsidy, and then that subsidy going away. So the NLC has a sign-on letter to encourage Congress to fund this as soon as possible. The LOC is going to sign on, and we are encouraging as many of our members to sign on to this letter as well. I will put a link to the sign-on letter in the chat. I'll also include my contact information in case you have any questions, but just want to make sure to flag this for each of you and encourage you to sign on.
Thank you, Nolan. I appreciate the update. And as Nolan mentioned, he'll put the link in there. Mayor Keebler of Bend, you had your hand raised when Scott was talking. I'm going to take that to mean you have a question for Scott. So Scott, if you can come back online, and Mayor, if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yeah, thanks, Patty. Scott, you kind of touched on this, but I would really love to just hear your opinion when you said, oh, there's amendments coming. What is the feeling on how much actual room is on what came out of the committee, the joint committee? Because we've had some contact with our rep, Jason Krupp. We've given some input, as you mentioned, but we're not feeling like there's a lot of things that are going to change before this goes to a vote. So I would love to get your thoughts on that.
I think the sticking point between the public safety lobby and where the co-chairs of that committee are is the C versus the A misdemeanor offense for possession of controlled substance. There's also the way paired with that is how this deflection program works. And so we know there's not going to be full agreement on which offense is going to be charged, and we may have that may come down to some vote counting. But we're also working to make sure that if that deflection passes, that it's something that could actually be implemented. Because as drafted, it was looking at like three contacts with the same person from the officer for the C miss. And so we're trying to get that to a point that if they do go this route, that it is something that could be implemented. The other parts of the bill that we like, or there's movement on, is reducing the number of pills of fentanyl pills a person could have and be eligible for that C miss. And so right now, if you have more than, under the amendment, I believe it's if you have more than 2 fentanyl pills, then you would get the A, possession of a controlled substance charge. And so dropping that has some value. The concern we have with the C is that people will get charged with the C even with that deflection program in place, and the consequences of a C misdemeanor are easier for the defendant to meet than complying with a drug court treatment plan. Drug courts do wonderful things to help people, but they require the defendant to do work. The C gets you 15 days max if there's any community corrections component of that sentence. So the judge could give somebody 30 days and no community corrections. That's highly unlikely to happen. It's more likely that you would want somebody to have community corrections supervision while they're for this offense. Other parts of the bill that are certainly helpful are making sure that C miss is, even if it is a C miss, that is a drug-related offense. So that would make them eligible for those community correction services. Normally, you wouldn't see community correction involvement for a B or a C miss. I'm sorry, misdemeanor. It's a horrible habit. I do use the acronyms. And
I'm a former prosecutor. It's fine.
I didn't know that. Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, so that's where we're at. There are things in the bill we absolutely support. I mean, fixing the Boyd-Hubbell decision, which makes that's a court decision that made it very difficult for police and prosecutors to pursue convictions for drug dealing. That's in the bill. Sentencing enhancements for people who deal to vulnerable populations or close to vulnerable populations. That's in the bill. That reduction, the change in the standard between making it more easier to charge for the A miss for small amounts of fentanyl is in the bill. We're really sticking on that. That AC conflict is really where the crux of it is.
Thanks, Scott. And I'm going to jump ahead of Carol Samuels because the note in the chat indicates she has to leave. But Mayor Beatty of Milwaukee, we do have 3 Mayor Beattys in the state. So Mayor Beatty of Milwaukee asked a question. Lindsay, I think it's probably for you, and I think you are on. But the question for Mayor Beatty is there any momentum behind HJR 201, which she understands to put forward a constitutional amendment to allow for a statewide property tax for public safety? She sees it as set for a hearing before the Rules Committee this Tuesday.
Thank you. Yeah. Hi, everyone. Lindsay Tennis. I cover tax, finance, and economic development for the league. So HJR 201 and its partner bill, House Bill 4075, were just scheduled for public hearings on Tuesday at 1 in House Rules. Together, these bills refer a ballot measure to the voters to create a new statewide property tax. And then HB 4075 sets up a statewide administrative task force that would decide how those funds are spent. We are opposed to this bill because, fundamentally disagree with the state deciding how to spend property tax revenue. And although the bill says public safety, it doesn't define where it goes, and it has an 80-20 split. 80% would go to local and regional providers, 20% would go to the state, probably to support wildfire funding. And this bill is kind of also combined in a larger discussion about how the state pays for wildfire funding in the long term. It's one of 3 different proposals out there to kind of help the state pay for wildfire funding. As far as its chances in the legislature, you never know. But the legislature passed 3 ballot measure referrals in the 2023 session that will be on the ballot this fall. So that in and of itself lowers the likelihood that there is appetite for them to pass another referral. So, kind of be prepared for anything, but I would say it'd be unlikely for them to pass another referral. And we've heard from other local government partners, there's some strong opposition for similar reasons and wanting to maintain property tax under local discretion for how to spend.
Thanks, Lindsay. Okay, as I said at the beginning, I'm gonna prioritize members first, since that's our primary service provider. So I see a question from Counselor Marilyn Smith from the City of Albany. I think this question's for you, Scott. It relates to House Bill 4002. She says, how does House Bill 4002 potentially affect wraparound services administered by the county BHRNs?
Thank you. That is a great question. The bill does several things on treatment outside that we are deferring to our friends over at the county public and behavioral health units on. But my understanding is that the bill does require that all the CCOs, community care organizations, have contracts with treatment providers throughout their geographical territory. So that in order to keep their Oregon Health Plan, which is Medicaid contracts, they would need to offer treatment services throughout their territory. So that's actually a really good thing. The bill also requires that in the deflection plan, and that's part of the negotiations that we're involved in, is ensuring that those burn grant, the organizations who got the 110 money are involved in providing services. And so we know that's hit and miss throughout the counties. There are some that are more functional than others, but there would be some requirement and there'd be some obligation on part of those burn grant recipients to provide those services, which can include housing for somebody while they're getting treatment. That's other addiction service, treatment, peer support services, and those sorts of things. There's one thing I did forget in the bill that it was pretty important to us, is that it expanded the length of the detox stabilization hold from 48 to 72 hours. There was a move to make a fairly complicated rubric on using whether or not the person had naloxone or whatnot. And we just said, please just take some white out, scratch out 48, replace it with 72, and that's what they did. So I hope that answers the question on the services piece. I think some of that is going to be a longer conversation in 25 as well. Whatever happens this session, we're not done.
Thanks, Scott. So there was a question in the chat, which I think Mia Kubler answered, but it's from Counselor Peter Hall, who asked, is there a B misdemeanor? And my guess is the question is really more, we're talking a lot about A versus C. Is there a reason why B isn't in the mix? Can you first of all restate for those who can't see the chat what a B misdemeanor is and why it's not part of the discussion? Because I think that's generally the question that's being asked.
Thank you for that. Yes, there is a B misdemeanor. The challenges with the B misdemeanor are similar to what we have with the C, is that it is a B miss would be disorderly conduct. There's some harassment that might be at a B miss level. It's really about prioritization for the courts. The challenges with the B are pretty similar to the challenges we have with the C. We felt like the A misdemeanor that was offered in the league plan with our public safety partners, that included an option for multiple chances for diversion, was really the best way to mix to meld the public safety, judicial, and behavioral health roles. So that's why we're sticking on it. I know it seems attractive to simply compromise on the B, but there are some challenges with the B as well.
Thank you, Scott. And I see we have a hand raised from the city manager of Gold Hill, Lily Morgan. Lily, if you want to unmute yourself, you can ask your question.
Oh, thank you. I I was just gonna add to that conversation that those that are asking for the A misdemeanor, it's not that they're wanting it to be a higher level. It's just that that's the lowest level that you have supervised probation at. And so both the B and the C are in the same category. And those fighting for a C misdemeanor are trying to say, okay, we're going to up the accountability at the lowest level possible, but neither of them address the supervised probation. And just my background, I was the parole and probation supervisor for Josephine County for a while before I was a state legislator. So sorry to jump in there.
Thank you.
You're always
Okay,
welcome.
so
Lily.
thanks, Scott. Okay, so I think based on what I'm seeing and what staff is telling me, I've gone through everybody with a question from our members. So Carol was not leaving you out, but you had a question early on about for Scott related to PERS and 4045. I'm trying to go back through. Scott, if you want to stay online.
Sure.
And if you have the question ready, or sorry, it's hard for me to go back through.
I can speak to
You can see
4045.
it. There you go. There you go. Thanks, Scott.
So 4045 was up this week. Yeah, it was a busy week. This bill creates, it does three things, two of which are of interest to the cities. One, it creates a new category of PERS employee. So right now there are two categories. There's your general service employees, and then there's P&F, police and fire. This would create a third category for high risk workers that would involve police or dispatchers, emergency telecommunicators, so call takers and dispatchers, and then state hospital workers. It is my understanding that the state hospital does have a very significant problem with worker safety and work conditions there. So we're not disputing the difficulty of the work. I think our concern, what the league did testify to, is that the bill was adding benefits at a time while the system was underfunded. Our current funded status is about 73%, which is roughly where we were in 2019 when we did the reforms. So the league did testify against the bill. It's got a lot of energy behind it. I don't think we stop this bill. I mean, I'm just going to be pretty blunt about that. It's got the support of both public safety management and labor. And the management, I think, is viewing this as a way to address workforce issues. We did offer some solutions to mitigate the costs. We're not going to get those this session, but I think it'll be an ongoing conversation. Talk to the committee chair. We will be having a conversation about funding a public safety side account within PERS, similar to what was done with schools, to help mitigate and smooth some of these costs. And then the permanent work after retirement was on the table. The bill fully implements in 2030. So when that happens, we'll only have 5 years left where workers can return to employment for an unlimited number of hours. And I know this has some weird optics to it, but man, that work after retirement is putting about $50 million extra into local government, predominantly local government pension liabilities, funding those liabilities. So it's punching above its weight. So we're working to mitigate this cost. I think the bill will pass, and we're going to have a conversation in the next probably two legislative sessions on how we mitigate these increases. But it was disappointing, I think, and we got up there, we did our part, but it's the way this works sometimes.
Thanks for the update, Scott. And we didn't get to hear from all of the lobbyists today. We wanted to give you the 4 bills that were top of mind, but we do have multiple lobbyists. If you haven't already, LOC lobbyists, make sure that your information, name, and a portfolio description is in the chat so that members know how to contact them. I am seeing one question coming in. Ariel, this will be you. It's related to the governor's housing bill. I have a request from a King City commissioner. How many jurisdictions realistically would be allowed a UGB expansion under the governor's housing bill? I don't know if we have any information on that, but if you could respond.
Thank you. That's a great question. So unfortunately, we don't have great data on that. So I'll kind of start from what the bill does. So you may know that this UGB one-time tool was introduced last session. The league is supportive of this tool. Right now, it doesn't actually work for any city. So that's one of the reasons we know another amendment is coming. But to qualify to use this tool, to be eligible, first off, it can only be used for either designated urban reserves, which outside of metro, I think only about 13 cities in the state have urban reserves. And if you don't have urban reserves, the land has to be non-resource land. And my understanding is that there are not most cities don't have a lot of non-resource land in terms of options to expand. So that already is a fairly small pool of cities. Then from there, to qualify, there are two eligibility criteria. The first is that you have to demonstrate need in two ways. The first is through affordability. So you have to show through some kind of obscure HUD data that your percentage of severely rent burdened residents is higher than the state average. I do have a rough Excel that one of the city's staff pulled of that data if you want to see kind of who's on that list. They just added another provision. DLCD has a list of severely rent burdened cities using other data points, but it's only for cities with population of 10,000 and above. So that's why the governor's office used the HUD data, because it's available for all cities. There's a little bit of difference between those two lists. So you may qualify on one, but not the other. But again, that's just a handful of cities again. And then the second thing you have to qualify for is if you have had a UGB expansion in the last 20 years, I believe it's 70% of that land has to be entirely developed and or development ready. And we just had a negotiation yesterday about what that means. So there's a lot of qualifications for cities to qualify for this. I think it's still a handful of cities that would technically qualify. And then in order to do the expansion, which the maximum expansion under the bill is 150 acres. And then if you're a city within metro, the total expansion possible in metro is 600. So depending on how many folks would want to do this in terms of cities in the metro metro, then that caps it as well. And then if you do it, you also, the land, there's a lot of requirements for what you do with the land. They want to plan for complete communities, or there's a concept plan requirement where there are transit requirements and density, affordability. A certain percentage has to be affordable, has to be a certain density. So that is a lot of work. I frankly have only heard from 2 cities that definitely would want to use this tool. They both testified yesterday. Another city that's potentially interested, but it's that has urban reserves. And I've tried to really, reach out to cities and ask, is this something that you would need or use? And what I've heard is cities either don't need land, or if they do, they don't have non-resource land, or this is not an option for them for the other reasons. So on paper, I know the governor's office has run these numbers. They haven't really shared them yet. I've asked. They say that there are cities that qualify. I haven't confirmed who those are that meet all 3 of the criteria that I mentioned, whether it's non-resource land or urban reserve, whether you have a severe rent burden population, or whether you've got land, if you brought in land recently, whether it's developed or almost developed.
Thanks, Ariel. Just a quick time check. We do have 15 minutes left, and we're happy to continue taking more questions. I'm not seeing any in the chat or any hands that are raised, so I'll give you a few more minutes to think of some in case you have it. And a quick reminder, we're going to do these webinars every Friday during session. They will always start at noon, and they will always conclude by 1. So please feel free to keep joining. We do also record them, and they will be uploaded to our website. So if you have a conflict one day and you can't be here, you can get the information at a later date. The second update for people to be aware of is this week we released our first ever Lobbying 101 toolkit. So if you're stepping your toe into kind of working with your legislator for the first time and you want some tips and practical understanding of how to do so, you can find that toolkit on our website. And the last thing to update everybody on, because I'm still not seeing any questions popping up in the chat, is to remind everybody that we are currently taking registration for our upcoming spring conference, which is scheduled for April 25th and 26th at the Running Y Resort in Klamath Falls. We do have space that is limited, so if you are thinking of attending, I encourage you to register sooner rather than later. The conference hotel itself is already sold out, but please don't worry, we do have 2 satellite hotels that are showing plenty of rooms. So I've talked for probably another 60 seconds. I'm not seeing any additional hands pop up or questions in the chat. So we're going to hold on. People came in at the last minute. I love it. So let me go back up here. So question for Ariel. Ariel, can you please speak about the DLCD model code funding bill?
Yes, I saw, can I answer the question above it really
Oh,
quick?
sorry. Yes,
So it
didn't see
says
that one.
dash 4 amendment, this is going back to the governor's bill, Senate Bill 1537. Cities must allow 10 adjustments. Who decides what they must be? The city? No, the bill explicitly lays them out. And there's some sideboards on how much of an adjustment a city has to grant per category, but they're laid out in the bill. And I can send you those sections if you want to send me your email, or feel free to email me. I put my email in the chat. And I can give you that information. On that next question, can Ariel speak about the DLCD model code funding bill? Yes, I just learned what that's about. I think if you're referring to Senator Anderson's bill, let me just pull up the bill number. 1 second. I'll get it in a second, but it is Senator Anderson's bill. I'm sorry, I don't have the number memorized. And it directs DLC to create model codes for cities to use. And I talked to the person working on this bill, and it is very well intentioned. They are working on some amendments that would clarify it a little bit. The intent here is they want DLC to create a model code that a city could opt into, so it would be optional. So as the DLCD, if you don't know, is currently in the rulemaking process for implementing House Bill 2001 from last year, which established the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis, and is going to set housing production targets for every city. And so this bill is intended to have a model code that if cities opted into it and adopted it, that would qualify them for meeting the requirements of ONA. It's meant to be like a fast path. Nothing would prevent a city from doing their own thing. They could completely ignore the model code. They could use it as a reference and use parts of it, or incorporate parts of it as a start into their own code, but it's meant to be a tool and not a stick. So that's the intent of that bill. And just kind of getting into the meat of it, it's a short session. I'm assuming DLCD will put a pretty big fiscal impact on the cost for them to do that, but it seems like a logical thing to do. And at worst would be a good conversation to start in the legislature. So we're appreciative to Senator Anderson for bringing this forward.
Ariel, I think the next 2 questions in the chat are also for you. The question is there any part of the bill or any bills that are working basically to curb frivolous appeals or help with the land use process to overcome opposition to growth in housing production?
Yes. So first question, frivolous appeals. Yes. One of the sections of Senate Bill 1537, the governor's bill that we support, it had to get drafted correctly, so that's in the dash 4, is a section that would allow a court to award attorney's fees. I'll back up. If a city approves a housing development application and then someone appeals that, and potentially for frivolous reasons or for reasons that aren't upheld, and the court upholds the city's decision and says, yes, city, you made that decision, this housing is approved, then the city is eligible to receive the cost of their attorney's fees. So they can have basically the staff time, the attorney time that went into supporting that decision covered. Also, the development applicant would also get their attorney's fees covered. So we are very appreciative to have this. This is just for housing development, not other types of development. So the intent of that is to curb frivolous appeals. It's to make people think twice about bringing appeals that don't really have merit. And then the other question, help with the land use process to overcome all the opposition to growth in housing production. There isn't a current proposal, but we are working with partners. I think folks may be aware of an example happening right now in one of our cities where the city recently completed a UGB expansion that was fully approved through the regular land use process, approved through DLCD. And now there's a group of folks who have referred it to the ballot to have potentially the voters repeal the approved UGB expansion. That really seems to be counterproductive. And why do we have a land use system if, interested parties or folks who have philosophical disagreements with land use decisions able to do this? And I'll note that the folks supporting the referral are not actually residents of the city, nor are they landowners who would be affected by the UGB expansion. They found someone within the city to file this referral. So we are working on some language that would make it clear that UGB expansions are not referable, that the land use decision is the final decision. It's a short session. We don't, this is potentially controversial. So it's, the path for that political path is not easy, but it's something that the LLC is very supportive of, and it would apply to any city that found itself in this decision. Now we also know that there are other cities who are experiencing challenges, just doing their regular comprehensive plan updates, that there are property owners who don't want to see growth or don't want to see neighbors happen down the road. And those folks are being challenged through recall efforts and ethics complaints, which is, has nothing to do with the merit. So that's a lot more challenging to push back on or to find a fix for, but we're having lots of discussions. We have legislators who are very sympathetic. We will be exploring options. That's a harder nut to crack. We think there's going to be a lot of cities in that position as cities are growing and building housing as urgently as they can. So we'll be looking for opportunities and bright ideas this session and next session, and we'll be continuing that conversation, certainly.
Thanks, Ariel. These have all been really great questions today. I'm going to do one last reminder. So if your question comes in, we'll ask it. If not, we will finish a few minutes early. So the bulletin for this week, that's the electronic newsletter that goes out via email every Friday, is out. It will have further information about the bills that you heard today, as well as others. We do have a legislative landing page on our home site, so you can certainly get information there. The lobbyists have all put their contact information as well as their portfolios in the chat. So if you have specific questions about a bill or topic that hasn't happened, you can go ahead and you can reach out them directly. Mayor Walke from Lincoln City has gotten in under the buzzer in a question. So Scott, this one's going to be for you. She's indicated there was a message. Oh, I guess there was a message earlier in the chat about the OGEC and public meetings law. I apologize, I missed it. Thanks for reminding me, Mayor Walke. Scott, if you can pop online.
Sure. I'm sorry, I didn't see it in the chat, but there is a bill to correct a technical issue with the public meetings law from last session. It just allows the OGEC to give advice and subsequent safe harbor when for questions on open meetings law. So under executive session and ethics laws, ethics statutes, you can get protection if you ask OGEC for advice ahead of time, depending different levels of protection for different types of advice. So they wanted to extend that to open meetings. So I think we're still waiting for OGEC to develop their own training. And I think OGEC is waiting for DOJ to update the open meetings public records manual in order to conduct that. That's my current understanding of the status.
And thanks, Scott. And I did find the chat. It was apparently House Bill 4117, a status update that is regarding the advisory opinion for the public meetings law. I don't know if you have an update specifically on the status.
Yeah, that bill's moving. Good bill should pass.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Mayor Walke, for pointing that out. Kevin, I apologize for missing that earlier. Okay, so I think that brings us to the end of the day. I hope to see you all next Friday, same time, same virtual place, noon. And I hope that you register and attend the LOC Spring Conference in Klamath Falls later this April. Have a good weekend. Hopefully you are not like LOC lobbyists and having to work this weekend and you can spend time with family and friends. Enjoy your days. We'll see you next week.